Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining and being here. So if you haven't attended a chat before, the way that this is going to go is that our guest speaker, Eliza, will talk about her craft, her journey to get to where she is now. There's also going to be some writing time, some sharing time, and then there's also going to be a Q&A. So if at any points during the chat you have any questions, make sure to jot those down. Maybe you want to drop them in the chat early, just so that those are there and ready for the Q&A. I am going to introduce Eliza VanCort, who is an in-demand consultant, speaker, and writer on communications, career, and workplace issues, and women's empowerment. And she'll be talking about her forthcoming book, A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space, Stand Tall, Raise Your Voice, Be Heard. And if you see Eliza's beautiful background, there is a door behind her that she wanted to give a shout out to because it has all of the signatures of her students. So she actually has 2 doors that are just full of signatures of her previous students. And I will pass it on to you now.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I love what everyone wrote about claiming space. It's just fantastic. We took a lot of time trying to figure out the perfect wording. I feel like I should have pulled you in as consultants. Really wonderful. So I'm going to dive into my talk. I love questions, so please feel free to pepper me with questions when we get to the question portion. And of course, we'll be doing some writing after this. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about me. So thank you again. And I really am so excited to be here sharing space with all of you. So I want to start with me as a little girl. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in my imagination. My childhood was a bit rocky, but in my imagination, I could be whatever I wanted to be. And what I wanted to be when I was little, more than anything, was Lois Lane, because she was so pretty and Superman was in love with her. So I was really determined to be just like Lois when I grew up. Eventually, however, I began to question whether this was a solid and stable life strategy. Thinking about it, I realized that waiting for Superman to emerge from the sky and take you on a joyride when you had 0 flying skills yourself is highly problematic, to say the least. So I was thinking, well, what if he dropped me off somewhere, you know? So after realizing that Superman could drop me off just about anywhere if he needs to save a kitten from a tree, for example, and I would have no way of getting back until he came back and saved me, and I could be stuck in, say, Antarctica with a lot of penguins, I eventually arrived at this conclusion. Lois could have Superman. But more importantly, I decided that if I wanted to fly like a superhero, I was going to have to learn to become one myself. But until I was in my 40s, I didn't really understand how to do this. I thought I did. I spent a lot of time teaching other people how to be superheroes, and I was really good at it, but I wasn't doing it myself. And then in 2014, everything changed for me. I was hit by a car while riding my bike. So I was riding my bike. Someone thought it was a better idea to text and drive than just drive. And they slammed into me. I went onto the hood of their car. I got knocked unconscious. I was completely blacked out, got thrown into the middle of the intersection, hit the other side of my head. And I woke up with a bilateral brain injury and a subdural hematoma, which means I was bleeding into my brain. So this is a picture of me and my family only weeks after my accident. I looked pretty okay at this point, but in reality, my memory was severely compromised. I'd go to sleep at night remembering everything, and then I would wake up and half my day would be gone. I was terrified. I was absolutely worried that I would never function again. But slowly, I began remembering a little more and a little more each morning. And I started to think that beyond little things like being completely repulsed by raw tomatoes before my accident and absolutely craving them, like really craving them after my accident, I was actually going to be me again. I was going to be okay. The only weird thing for me was that my friends and family were acting very strangely. And eventually, one of my closest friends, Kim, came over, and we all need that friend who just tells it to you like it is. And I said to Kim, Kim, it's so weird. I feel so much better, but everybody's acting so strangely. And she took a deep breath and she said, Eliza, they aren't acting strangely. You are. Your vocabulary is completely compromised and you just aren't communicating well. People really don't know what to do. Another friend of mine jokingly said I sounded like a stoned third grader when I had to confirm that Kim was correct. And while it sounded kind of funny, I was actually quite devastated. My communication had always been one of my most powerful career tools and life tools. And now not only was I communicating poorly, but I was so compromised that I didn't even know that I couldn't communicate well. So I fought a feeling of hopelessness daily. I was afraid. I wanted to hide in my bed and never leave, and I kind of did for a while. But thankfully, I eventually realized that hiding in my bed wasn't going to get me better. And if I wanted my life back, I would have to commit fully to building my communication back brick by brick. And I knew it was going to be a long, hard process, but I knew that was okay. And I approached the job with this old adage in my head, which is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So doing this, rebuilding my communication, involved many different approaches. I researched voice and body. I watched people. I read books. I observed my own behavior. I learned about the voice in the body. And I noticed that people who were not white men, who took up a lot of space with their voices and their bodies, tended to be taken more seriously. And I learned that women, white men were just taken seriously for the most part, but women and men and people who are not white men, if they had certain affects with their physicality and voice, they got a lot less pushback and they were taken more seriously. And I also learned that women who weren't afraid of silence tended to be more heard. One thing I don't talk about much when I explain how I recovered is something that I think many of you will relate to. I wrote. My memory was just so shot after the accident. And I was so scared. And one day my sister from another mother, Katie Spallone, gave me a gift. She encouraged me to write at bedtime after my accident. This way, even though I would wake up with little memory of what happened the day before, at least I had written it all down. And it really hurt to look at the screen. So I touch typed with my eyes closed, recalling what I learned and experienced. And every day, Katie would read what I wrote, send it back to me edited, and then follow up with a phone call, or maybe even a visit, encouraging me to write more. And this is when things really started to turn around for me. And new studies have actually shown that writing was helping my brain to recover. I was mostly writing stream of consciousness about my day at that point. But when I recovered and I could finally go over and read what I had wrote, I realized that in what we think is trash in our writing, there is often treasure. In fact, there is always treasure. And I'm convinced that Katie's love and encouragement about my daily writing wasn't only a critical part of my recovery, but that her encouragement is a big part of why I'm a writer today. It's her love and sisterhood which freed me to write without judging myself or judging my writing. Katie wasn't just my friend, though. Katie and I have built a community together. She is the co-director of my acting school. The community of artists we've built together over the last almost 20 years has been my rock. It's been where I've met many of my closest friends, I've gained work collaborators, and I've found much of my support system. So after my accident, Katie organized meals for my family. We had meals brought to my house for 2 months every single day. My community has always been my rock, but I'm involved in other communities beyond the arts, activists, writers, all different kinds of artists, women in business, my hometown community, local politics. Community is everything to me. And I actually dedicate a fifth of my book to how we can build and maintain community. So today I'm going to share some highlights from that part of my book. This is my favorite mug, by the way. It's my Don't Quit Your Daydream mug. I love it. So community. There are 3 ways, really important ways to build community. And it's a little more complex than I think people think when they just say, oh, network. It's actually much more complex than that. Number 1 is know your worth. Number 2 is disconnect from people who would make you small. And number 3 is forge connections. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go deeply into all 3, although I could talk about this all day, but I do want to dive into 2 concepts I think are critically important. The first one is disconnecting from people who would make you small. We all need cheerleaders in our lives, people who support us and lift us up. Unfortunately, what I have found, especially as a mentor, but also with myself, is that much of the time we don't look to our cheerleaders in the right places. We look to our cheerleaders in all of the wrong places. Specifically, we go for the very people that we should not go to for support. And those people I call our anti-mentors. Anti-mentors are the folks who should be your greatest cheerleaders, but instead they leave you off balance and feeling really small. And if you have people in your life who cause you to feel that way, try your best not to go to them for support. We tend to go to these folks for support because our inner critics are often nurtured and sometimes birthed by our anti-mentors. And in many ways, we allow these folks to define us. So if they finally approve of us, then that's when we feel like, oh, that's so much more validating than if our cheerleaders tell us we did a great job. So we adopt this sort of thinking of like, oh, well, if my cheerleader is supportive, we can't really trust them because they're always nice. But if our critics think we did a good job, then we must have done a good job. Then it's real. The great irony, of course, is that most of the time, it's our cheerleaders who see us so much more clearly than our anti-mentors because they see the best in us. They inspire us to be our best selves. And when we're at our worst, this is not who we are at our core. That's not who we are at all. It's when we tap into our full potential, when we're our most true selves. That's who we are, when we are fully ourselves and we fully tapped into our potential. That is who we really are at our core. And this is why we want to surround ourselves with folks who see us at our best. They see us clearly, unlike our anti-mentors who see a negative, distorted view of us. So identify who are the anti-mentors in your life and try very hard to find other people who build you up rather than tear you down. Never, ever, ever let your anti-mentors be the person with the bullhorn in your community. No, never do that. The next thing I want to talk about is the scarcity myth and rejecting the scarcity myth. And I'm going to read just a little bit of my book from you now. It's not completely cohesive. I've cut and pasted a couple parts, but these are the critical parts about the scarcity myth. And here I go reading to you from my book. All kinds of forces keep us from connection. One of the most powerful reasons that people who are not white men stay disconnected historically is that we have not had access to power and resources. This has created a collective feeling of scarcity for us. And it can be really hard to shake the feeling that there are not enough resources to go around. So you have to get what you can before it runs out. And I call this fighting for our spot on the bottom. Historically, women have not had a seat at the table of power. And if a woman was there, there were only a few of us, or maybe one of us, or maybe just a few of us, and a handful of white women, possibly and usually only one Black, Asian, Latinx, or Indigenous woman. And we were alone at the top, and we're fighting to stay there, or we're fighting tooth and nail to move up the ladder. And this historic memory, this feeling of scarcity, still does echo, it still remains. So I want you to think of power as a triangle. And at the top of this triangle is a little mini triangle. And that triangle holds the power. And everyone below that top triangle has varying degrees of less power. And the lower you go down on the triangle, the less power you have. Historically, that tiny top triangle has been reserved for men. Specifically, it has been reserved for cis white men. When women somehow make it to the top of that triangle, we can feel unconsciously as if there is room for only one of us. And that's understandable because often that's been the case. This is why women sometimes go after other women. And interestingly enough, often this happens more so when that woman that they're going after who's going up is in their demographic. So here's what usually happens. The person in the targeted group who's already in the position of power unconsciously feels threatened by the up-and-comer. And the up-and-comer feels they'll never be able to move up if the person in the targeted group already there isn't pushed down. Both of these responses, ironically, don't just hurt targeted groups in the moment, they also reinforce white male power structures. So while some people, not all people, but some people are busy eviscerating each other, men are locking arms, going out for beers, hiring, collaborating, and promoting each other, and the cycle continues. So instead of the scarcity myth, we need to adopt the opposite orientation. Claim space ferociously, and you will rise up. Rise up, and you will have the power to reach down and help other women ascend with you and other targeted groups ascend with you. So we need to reject the scarcity myth and help other women, hire women, defend women, promote women, have tea with women, go dancing with women, tell your stories, listen to others' stories, raise up your daughters' voices, listen to your mother's and your grandmother's stories, love your sisters, embrace what makes us the same, and learn from our differences. And always, always remember that networking is deeper than a work community. It is more inclusive than a group of friends. It is wider than our beloved families. Networking is a mindful act of connectedness. It is a choice to raise each other up. So make that choice for yourself and for all of us. And if you do, we really will rise higher. So when people hear that I give a talk about claiming space and I talk about the things that I just talked about, they often have this reaction to me. Well, of course you could do it. It looks like it'd be so easy for you. Look at you. You look like you're not afraid of anything, which is definitely not true. So before I end, I actually want to get a little more personal with you. When I said that I had a bit of a rocky childhood in the beginning, I would have been a little more accurate if I had said I had a profoundly traumatic childhood. My mother was paranoid schizophrenic. And when I was little, I was taken across the country hitchhiking by truck from New York to California, truck stop to truck stop to truck stop. My dad had full custody of me. And at the time, my mom decided just to take off with me during a visitation. And the police considered it a kidnapping, and they put out a national APB, all points bulletin, on me. So every police officer in the country was looking for me. And what happened on that trip as a mother, I think about it now. And I think about how I would feel if that happened to my children. And I understand why it was that moment and those experiences that were the beginning of me making myself small, because that's when I began conflating invisibility with safety. Because women are taught from the time they're little girls, so they're taught viscerally that if you're going to be smart or assertive, you better be small, you better, be charming and non-threatening and don't take up too much space, be nice, take care of others' needs, don't make waves. For women of color, the pressure can be even greater. But there isn't a woman alive who hasn't received pushback for moving throughout the world from a place of strength for claiming space. And we're told to make ourselves small from the time we're little girls. So when you're starting your journey with the goal of invisibility, which so many of us have if we've had any kind of trauma or difficult experience, claiming space is a lifelong struggle. Thankfully, with the love and care of my community and mentors in my life and my family, I eventually found some success claiming space. But like many of us, I also really struggled. And my accident was a thing that forced this really painful personal growth and discovery. And through my recovery and my writing, I saw so clearly that I had led much of my life navigating the power of others so I would stay safe. So that little girl who in her head thought she could be a superhero, she had never really learned to fly. In fact, she had been scared to even put on her cape. So today it's really hard for me to look back on how small I made myself for decades. And I want to share with you that picture of me right after my accident again. And I hope you'll see it with different eyes now. You'll see how small I was making myself. I was ceding space left and right. Look at this, I'm in heels, despite the fact that I could barely stand up at that point. I chose a position where my family, my own children, had to actually hold me up. And look at my body language. My head is tilted down, my toes are pointing together. If you want to know if someone thinks the world expects them to be small, watch their feet. That is a huge tell. Little children point toes together, particularly little girls. There is nothing in our society less threatening than a cute little girl. And we still reward grown women for standing like little girls, small, off balance, needing other people for support. But for me, my accident was a total game changer. So when I was asked to do a photo shoot for the cover of my book, many of my shots looked like this. And I hope that's going to come up in a second because it's one of my favorites. Learning what it meant to claim space changed everything for me. This one didn't make it to the cover of the book, but it is a living embodiment of claiming space. In the end, I didn't end up using that photo. We chose this one. We couldn't have used the other one if I'd wanted to, as my gigantic legs would not have fit on the cover, but I love the photo we picked. Even though when my uncle saw this, anti-mentor, and I have many, so hopefully he won't know this is him that I'm talking about, but he said this to me, Eliza, you're so beautiful. Do you have to spread out like that? And my answer to him was this. No, I didn't have to. I chose to. I'm not sure I would have been able to say that if I hadn't had my community of sisters looking at that cover before being like, hell yes, that's amazing, that's awesome. But I did have that community and their voices were with me when my uncle said that. And when I answered him, they were all standing with me. So what I learned after my accident was that I had really had it wrong. I'd had it all wrong when I was a little girl. Women don't need superhero strength or golden lassos, although that would be awesome to be superheroes. What we really need to do is claim space. So what is claiming space? To claim space is to live the life of your choosing unapologetically and bravely. And hopefully we can show that slide. I'm going to wrap this part of our community chat up by sharing 5 ways of approaching life, which can empower you to claim space. I want to be really clear about this. They are not a quick fix. Claiming space is a lifetime of mindful expansion into your most fully realized self. I'm going to say that again. Claiming space is a lifetime of mindful expansion into your most fully realized self. Think of it as eating an elephant, one bite at a time. So here are the 5 aspects of claiming space. And if we could pull up that slide. Number 1, claim space, bow to no one. Communicate powerfully with your voice and your body. Number 2, claim space collaboratively. Amplify each other. Forge relationships that uplift you. This is what we talked about today. You can't claim space with a one-woman army. Attend to your friendships, cultivate your professional relationships, lean on other women, help other women, create and nurture effective, powerful old girl networks. Number 3, don't cede space, neutralize your kryptonite. Stop damaging patterns of self-sabotage. And I talk about all those different things we sometimes do in my book. Number 4, claim safety in any space. Shut it down. Thwart aggressors and protect yourself. And finally, claim space united. Commit to intersectionality. You cannot make yourself bigger if you are making other people smaller. You just can't. As my hero, Audre Lorde, famously said, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. So create a better world, not just for yourself, but for us all. So let's commit to being real superheroes. Let's claim space every day for ourselves, but also for each other. Because when we rise together, we really do rise so much higher. And thank you so much. I hope you will share your thoughts and claim some space later with me in Q&A. So now you know a little bit about my story.
So the writing prompt is, if you could talk to an authority figure and demand anything for your community without worry of pushback or consequences, what would you demand and why? So you're going to write for a few minutes. And what's really, really key here is to not edit what you're writing at all. Don't worry about how good it sounds. The key is just to get your thoughts out. So,
and I cannot stress that enough. Really just write without any judgment, just write it. And don't think about what you're writing because you're going to have a little bit of time to edit. So I want to kind of show people that even if you just throw your stuff out there, there will be things in there that are gems if you just don't watch yourself so much.
Exactly. Yeah, perfect. So we're going to give you a few minutes. We're going to play a little bit of music. And yeah, you can go ahead. Now we are going to do part 2 of this making demands activity. Part 2 is to take what you've written, put your editor hat on, and take a few minutes to find the gems in your writing. So you know how we mentioned that just write without worrying at all. And how Eliza mentioned that there's always treasure in trash, so to speak. So really take a look at what you've written and work to find the really, really good bits that are in there. So we're gonna give you a few minutes to do that now. We're gonna put the music back on and you can go right on ahead.
I'll tell you all that just to tell you how powerful how powerful voices are when you're not necessarily censoring yourself. When I wrote my book, I have a group of mentees I work with, and I asked them, they're all young women of color, and I asked them, if you could say one thing to white women, what would you say? And we have this text thread that they've named Convos in the Kitchen, because they used to come to my house when they're at Cornell, and we have these convos in my kitchen. And they all wrote this stuff just off the cuff, and it was so good that I asked if they'd be willing to let me use it to close the final chapter of the final section of my book before the conclusion, and they said yes. And so everyone who contributed, it was just so brilliant. Their voices close out that section of my book. And I don't know if they would have been able to do it quite so beautifully and artfully had they been watching themselves, but it was just so from their heart, and it's better than I could have ever said it. So I really do, I'm a big believer in not judging your writing and just writing from your heart and then going back. I think that there are several things that you can do to counteract the scarcity myth. One of those is that often the scarcity myth becomes a thing where you are actually set up. And what I mean by that is some unconsciously dynamics are often created in work environments, not all, but particularly in certain work environments where people are kind of pitted against each other who are in the same category. I work with a lot of CEOs that are women of color, and they will hear all the time, they'll tell me as they were coming up through the ranks that someone would say, oh, you did so much better than da da da. You're not like da da da. She's really lazy or whatever, all those trigger words or, and so they actually set up dynamics where they're sort of thinking, oh, let's just pit these two people who are the only person in their targeted group against each other. So the first thing you can do is make sure that when that happens, you start realizing, especially if it's secondhand information, oh, so-and-so said you didn't do well at blah, blah, always go to the source and make sure that you're not participating in that. And when people do that, you shut it down and you interrupt it. The other thing is mentorship, seeking out mentors. So often when people I had a young woman who's on Wall Street right now, and she's first generation in her family to go to college. She's Latinx. She's the only Latinx woman in her entire department. And she's getting it's a very, very hard time. And one of the people who's giving a hard time is an older woman who is above her in a different department, but she has to report to her. And I don't really understand the way that Wall Street works, but apparently there's this sort of weird structure. So she ended up, the woman has not been very kind to her, to say the least. And what I recommended, which she didn't want to do at first, was to go to the woman and say, I'm having a hard time. You're such an expert at blah, blah. Can you give me some guidance? Because you're just amazing. And she did this. She did not want to do it. She was a little like, I don't like this woman. And the woman said, sure, and had her in her office and they started talking. And the woman she was much, much older, started kind of pouring her heart out about everything that she had been through once this young woman told her story. And now she has an ally. And she realized that this woman was very, very threatened by her. And that's where a lot of this was coming from. And so as soon as she said, I want your guidance, it diffused that fear, that feeling of scarcity for her. And suddenly she moved from this person's going to usurp me to this person, I am a mentor to this person. So I think that's another really good way to stop that. And then when you're in that position, make sure you are mentor. As soon as people come in the door, if you don't, because people will sometimes go after the person here, right? You want to make sure you are also offering mentorship so that they don't feel like that feeling of scarcity as well. So the bottom line is the more you can forge connections with other women, specifically if you are it's an organization where there are few of you, because that's when the scarcity myth tends to be more intense, the better. And if I had more time, if you read my book, you'll read a really interesting story about this that happened to me once and how it can be transformative when you actually connect with each other. And you can pre-order my book, which I would love. And I will say that when you pre-order a book, it tells the bookstores that this is a book worth carrying. This is not a traditional book in many ways, the way that I approach this work. And so if you do have the ability to pre-order it, definitely tell Amazon that books that actually address intersectionality are books that people will buy, which is not always the case, interestingly enough.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Eliza. This was absolutely amazing. And as Eliza said, you can pre-order her book, A Woman's Guide to Claiming Your Space, on Amazon. So definitely check that out. But thank you so much. This has been fantastic. If everyone just wants to quickly unmute themselves and just give a round of applause to Eliza.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to follow me on LinkedIn and has questions, or on Facebook, please do. I love connecting with people. Usually sometimes 3 days after, they'll say, I have a question that we didn't get to answer. And I will get to your question eventually. It might take a while. So I'd love to hear from you.
That's great. That's so generous. Thank you, Eliza. If you are new to the Girls Right Now community, if you're not a current mentee or mentor, and you're interested in becoming more involved, you can do that at our inquiry link, girlsrightnow.org/inquiry. All right, that's it. Thank you for hanging on while I got through those announcements. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's been lovely having you all. And thank you so much to Eliza and her wonderful team. Thank you. Have a great evening.